as soon as they know which course they want to apply for, and if they know which college they want to apply to, then they can very easily find out whether that college will require them to take an admissions assessment or not.
Hello everyone, welcome to Cambridge from the Inside. We're here with
Marcus Tomalin. I'm the Director of Admissions here at Trinity Hall.
Nice, and we're going to be talking about the application process and admissions assessments in particular, everything that you need to know about admissions assessments, if they're different to admissions tests, and trying to explain the terminology there, and how you apply for them, does your subject have them, etc. So firstly, Marcus, for anyone who doesn't know, what are admissions assessments?
So they're part of the admissions process when people choose to apply to Cambridge. We can talk about the terminology maybe in a second, but they're basically tests, relatively short tests that enable us to assess the applicant's understanding of the subject they've applied for. So they give us an additional piece of information along with the stuff that we have in their UCAS application, things like their personal statement and information about their GCSEs and whatever else they've studied at school. So that's their role really in the admissions process, just to give us another insight into that individual's knowledge and understanding of the subject they've applied for.
Nice. And on the Cambridge website, you normally see the phrase admissions assessment, but then for some specific subjects, you might see the word test or like an acronym, the T standing for test. Is there any differences between admissions tests and admissions assessments?
The short answer is not really. No, the terms these days are kind of used interchangeably, really. So about sort of 10 years ago, when Cambridge started using admissions assessments more extensively than we had done previously, it was felt that to call them assessments was better because the word is slightly less intimidating perhaps than test. So initially they were all called assessments, but over the years some of them have been renamed and relabeled a little bit, and so they will include the word test in their title. But it doesn't really mean anything profound. Admissions assessments, admissions tests, they're all kind of the same thing. The assessments themselves will take different forms depending upon which particular course people are applying for, but sort of conceptually, an admissions assessment is exactly the same thing as an admissions test.
Nice. So if someone's applying for a specific subject and maybe they haven't chosen which college they're going to apply for, does the requirement of needing to do an admissions assessment change between the colleges?
It can do for some subjects.
Okay.
And again, this is where I think people who are seriously considering applying just need to spend a little bit of time looking at the relevant web pages. So as soon as they know which course they want to apply for, and if they know which college they want to apply to, then they can very easily find out whether that college will require them to take an admissions assessment or not. I think, for us to sit here today and just enumerate all the details about every course and every college, that would take probably a couple of hours and I think wouldn't be of any great use. All of that information is available. There are some admissions assessments that are taken by every single person who applies for that particular course, regardless of which college they've applied to. And then there are others where some colleges require people to take an admissions assessment, but other colleges don't. So there is a bit of variability around that. Yep.
And we'll put a link to that website that explains which subjects need it requires an admissions assessment, and it tends to include if that's difference between the colleges. We can include that website in the caption below. So do all subjects have a requirement for an admissions
Nope,
assessment?
nope. There are some that don't. And again, I think when people are clear about which course they want to apply for, then it's easy for them to work out whether that's relevant for them or not. So yeah, it's certainly not the case that all of them require it, but some of the, let's say, the most sort of popular courses, and by that I mean the ones that receive annually the largest number of applications, pretty much all of those have some kind of admissions assessment.
Okay. And does a student's school sign them up for an admissions assessment, or do they need to sign themselves up individually, or do we sign them up if they apply?
So again, as with all things to do with admissions assessments, unfortunately, there's a bit of sort of variation. For a significant number of them, the people applying have to sign themselves up. Again, depending upon their school, their school may help them do that, but the school isn't obliged to do that. It's the individual themselves. They have to take responsibility for registering for the admissions assessment, and then obviously making sure that they take it. That tends to be the case for, and we can come on to this distinction maybe a bit later. It tends to be the case for the admissions assessments that are taken before we make decisions about who we're going to interview or not. And some of the admissions assessments that are taken after we've made those decisions, those are admissions assessments where the college will just handle it. So the applicant, by applying, really, as it were, registered for that admissions assessment. So the college processing their application will say, okay, and the next step is to take the admissions assessment, and here's all the details. So yeah, it's a sort of mixture of things. Some people have to register for, some they don't. But again, the web pages make that absolutely clear.
Nice. And I definitely, if you're watching, I definitely wouldn't assume your school is going to sign you up to. It's definitely something worth double checking if you still need to sign yourself up to admissions assessment. Sometimes it might be something you've done amongst lots of other things and just have forgotten, but it's always good to double check. And for admissions assessments, do applicants need to pay in order to take the assessment?
Again, I'm basically going to give the same answer, I think, to every question. It's going to be really annoying for everyone watching. But yes, for some of them, there is a cost associated with it. And for others, there's no cost. And again, it tends to be that the admissions assessments that people have to take before we decide who we're going to interview, there's a cost associated with those. So just to give some concrete examples, if people apply for a certain subset of science subjects like engineering or natural sciences, things like that, then they have to take an admissions assessment that's called the ESAT. I'm terrible at expanding acronyms. I always forget what it expands to, but I think in that case, it's the Engineering and Science Admissions Test. I mean, the name is slightly misleading. It sort of implies that engineering isn't a science, and we're fully aware that engineering is a science. That's just the name it ended up with. And so people who apply for I say engineering, natural sciences, and a couple of other subjects, they have to take that admissions assessment, and there is a cost associated with that. But I should also say that there are also really generous bursaries. So if anyone is applying for a subject like that, and for instance, they're on free school meals and things like that, then there are bursaries to make sure that they don't have to pay that cost themselves. So again, if anyone's applying and they're in that kind of situation, I strongly encourage them to look in detail at the relevant parts of the web pages that will be in the link below, so that they know how to access those bursaries. That's crucial. What we want to avoid is a situation where people decide not to apply because they can't afford it. We want to avoid that situation because, of course, that would be sort of terrible.
Yeah, of course. And do admissions assessments, do they happen before interview, or do they happen before we've chosen who to interview, or are they something that happens after the interviews overall?
You know the answer by now. So some of them happen before we decide who we're going to interview, and then some of them happen afterwards. And so for the ones that happen before we make decisions about who we interview, so again, that's true of the one that I've already mentioned, the ESAT. There's also another kind of science admissions assessment called the TMUA that people have to take before we decide who we interview. Also the one for law that's called the LNAT, and people take that before we decide who we're going to interview. And in those sorts of cases, the admissions assessment plays sort of two roles. So initially, it's one of the sources of information that we consider when we're making decisions about who we're going to interview and who we're not going to interview. So initially, it helps us hopefully make good decisions at that stage. But then when we've completed all the interviews subsequently, we then continue to be interested in the admissions assessment, because again, it's still a source of information about how the applicants performed in relation to each other. And so it doesn't only play a role in helping us decide who we're going to interview and who we're not going to interview. It also plays a role in helping us decide who we're going to make offers to. And the other subtype of admissions assessments, the ones that people take after we've made decisions about interviewing, obviously they only have a kind of impact on our decisions about who's going to receive offers, because we haven't got that information when we're deciding who to interview.
Yeah, nice. Just to reiterate that, just for anyone who might be unsure. So I think it's clear if after you've been chosen to be interviewed, then you're asked to do an admissions assessment. I think it's clear that that admissions assessment, the use of it is to help us decide who to give an offer to. But I've heard a lot of students have asked me when we were doing our residential last week, asking if I do an admissions test and then I subsequently receive an interview, does that mean whether I get an offer is based on the interview alone and the admissions test is kind of forgotten about and was just used to proceed in the process? Would that be like a correct analysis of like the situation?
No, when we make decisions about who the offers should go to, we look at all the information we've got. So no piece of information is ever sort of jettisoned.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, when we're making decisions about offers, we're certainly looking at performance in the admissions assessment, if there is one. We're certainly looking at performance in the interviews. We're certainly looking at the school exam record. We're certainly looking at all of those things together. Yeah. So yeah, if people are applying for a subject where there's an admissions assessment, that will remain something that we pay close attention to right up until the point that we make decisions about the offers.
So someone could do really well in the admissions assessment and maybe other parts of their application, not do so well in interview, but should be reassured that all aspects of the application will be looked at.
Absolutely.
Nice. And leads on to my next question on how do we use admissions assessments for applications and like how to give offers to. I guess we've already covered that.
Yeah, I mean, you summarized it quite well yourself. I mean, so if the performance in the admissions assessment is really, really strong, and then maybe the performance in one of the interviews was weaker, the strong performance in the admissions assessment helps us decide eventually, well, we are going to make an offer to this person. Okay, they had one less than convincing interview, but maybe they had one strong interview and they did really well in the admissions assessment. So that sort of swings it in their favor. Yeah. And I guess, when we're using admissions assessments to make decisions about who to interview, what we do then is again, it's not the only thing we look at. We always contextualize things, and we're bearing in mind things like extenuating circumstances and socioeconomic context and all of that. But basically, what we can do is look at the distribution of marks for the admissions assessment, so we can get a little kind of bell curve distribution, basically. And from that, we can work out, and here I'm talking at the university level, not just the college level. So we always look at this at the university level. We can see who's in the lowest quartile, who's in the second lowest quartile, and who's in the top quartile. So that just gives us a way of sort of comparing and contrasting the performance of the applicants based on the admissions assessment. Although I stress again, that's not the only thing we look at. It's just one piece of information.
Nice. And I imagine some students might be thinking that they're, if they're already doing A levels or IB, whatever their qualification is, if they're already doing exams in their subjects, why are we asking them to, on top of that, do admissions assessments?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's perfectly reasonable that people ask it. I mean, they're already being tested a lot, in school. Why do we subject them to this? I think it's easiest to explain it by sort of encouraging people to look at it from our perspective. So people apply to Cambridge from all around the world. It's not the case that everyone who applies to us is taking A levels. A significant number are, but then there are different A-level exam boards, so they're not all sitting exactly the same exams. They might be covering similar topics, but they're slightly different exams. A significant minority of people are taking IB, and then we see people applying from France and from Canada and from America and from China. So they're doing often just a huge range of different types of school exams. So we can't compare and contrast people directly just based on their A levels, because not everyone's doing A levels. Whereas if all of those people, say if they're applying for a subject like medicine or they're applying for a subject like engineering, they all have to take the same admissions assessment. So it gives us one piece of common ground between all of those applicants. And as I say, we still pay attention to everything else, but we can say, out of the whole cohort of people who applied for medicine or whatever in this given year, this person was top, or this person was in the lowest quartile or whatever. So that's why we do it. It's so that we have some point of comparison between everyone who's applied for that subject across the university in a given year.
Nice. And as you said, it's not the only comparison. Doesn't stop us from making inferences between two students who might have different qualifications and etc.
Exactly.
One question that people might have is, I think it's just maths where the admissions test is after we give the offer. Can you explain a little bit about that, please?
Yeah, that's one of the few times I can give an answer and say it's not a bit of both. It's absolutely the case that, it's just for maths, where we tend not to think of it as an admissions assessment, really. It's kind of an additional qualification that we ask people to get, but as people who are thinking of applying for maths probably know already, it's called STEP. And if we have assessed someone's application and if we've decided to make them an offer, so we've already been through, the whole kind of admissions process, one of their offer conditions will be that they have to achieve a certain level of performance in STEP. And usually they would do that, as it were, that year, so the year after their application has been assessed. So that's just a slightly different pattern for maths, but all the other subjects, the admissions assessment, we have the information that we need at the point when we make our decisions about who to give offers to. Maths is the only one where, if you want to think of it as an admissions assessment, it sort of happens after the offer decisions have already been made.
Nice. And this is a very niche question, but for someone who's applied for maths and say they didn't get an offer, but they're subsequently put in the August reconsideration pool, should they still continue to do STEP even though they haven't got a Cambridge offer?
I mean, if someone's applying for maths and they're really interested in maths and if they end up not being at Cambridge, that they may be studying maths somewhere else, STEP is really useful. I mean, STEP is well worth doing, just as preparation for studying maths. It helps people deepen and strengthen their mathematical skills. So my advice would be to continue with it. just purely because of the benefit you get in terms of your knowledge and understanding of that particular subject.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, I remember doing a minimal practice to help my problem solving. That was a long time ago.
Did your problem solving improve?
It did. It did at the time of a solid 8 years ago.
Okay.
And I was the judge of that improved.
That's right. It's difficult to do that objectively.
There were some times where I had marked it myself and didn't really correspond with what the teacher thought, but that is a lesson for me at least. With regards to where you take your admissions test, are these tests online or are they in schools?
Yeah, again, this goes back to my standard answer. There's a bit of variety.
Yeah.
So for the admissions assessments, it tends to be the ones that people take before we make decisions about who we're going to interview. So things like the ESAT, things like the TMUA, things like UCAT, which is the one for medicine, and things like the LNAT, which is the one for law. Sorry about all the acronyms, but it just comes with the territory around admissions assessments. So they are taken at test centres, sort of approved test centres. And again, the information about that is all on the web pages. So people can't just take it in their house. They can't usually just take it in their school. They have to go to one of the sort of test centres and take it there. And these are computer based usually. Many of them are either entirely multiple choice or they have a component of multiple choice. And so that's how they work. But for other admissions assessments, and again, on the whole, ones that are taken after we've made decisions about who we're going to interview, again, it happens in slightly different ways, but these days, the standard pattern might be for the college to send the admissions assessment to the applicant, at a specified time on a specified day, and then the applicant has a period of time to complete it and then send it back. So that basically can be done online, and that doesn't have to be done in a special sort of test center or anything.
Okay, nice. That is a big variety. I guess if you're listening to this, you need to just work out what's required of your subject to the college.
That's right, because here we're trying to speak in general about it, and that's what makes it sound like kind of impossibly confusing. I guess, as I said earlier, if people know that they want to study subject X at college Y, it's completely trivial to find out what you need to do and when you need to do it by. It's when you're trying to talk about all subjects simultaneously that it just sounds like this crazy sort of Kafka-esque
exactly.
sort of situation. It's simpler than we're making it sound.
Kafka would not approve of this. No, not at all. So moving on towards how to prepare for the admissions tests. What advice would you have? Maybe there isn't a sweeping advice for all of them, but any advice you'd have for applicants for preparing for admissions tests?
Yeah, I think that the sort of high level advice is the same, which is make as much use as you can of all the available materials that are there on the web pages. So many of these admissions assessments have past papers, so you can look at previous questions and work through them, sometimes with sample answers. Some of the admissions assessments are relatively new, so there aren't lots and lots and lots of past papers, but in those cases there will be sample questions that you can look at and work your way through. There are specifications so that you know which particular mathematical topics or which particular topics in relation to physics could potentially be covered on the admissions assessment. So again, that's a useful thing to have. I just encourage people to spend a fair amount of time. I mean, don't go crazy. This doesn't have to become a sort of 24/7 thing, but just spend an appropriate amount of time making sure you know what the questions are going to be like, what sort of topics are likely to be covered, just so that when you then take the admissions assessment, you're as confident as you can be of demonstrating your ability in it. And as I say, there's a whole load of sample questions, past papers, worked examples, specifications, blah, 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 all available for free online. And people just need to make full use of that, I would say.
Nice. I know that one common trait through some of the admissions assessments and tests, maybe this is more towards the humanities side, is questions revolving around critical thinking. And for applicants, some people might have been taught and be well knowledged and versed in critical thinking, and some might be really good at critical thinking but just have never heard of the theory at all or idea of it. And then these multiple choice questions might be their first time being faced with the topic and being asked to do these multiple choice questions, and where all the answers seem like saying the same thing. Is there any advice for someone who, when they're doing these multiple choice questions, it's the first time they're doing something of this style, any advice for someone who might see it as, I know, quite daunting?
Yeah, I think practice helps, and that's why we try and make sure that there are sufficient materials available. And I think if people were just to work through the sample questions and get used to what the questions are like and what sort of answers are expected, I think that helps greatly with that. I mean, it's I guess it's relevant in particular for things like the UCAT, which, as I say, is the admissions assessment for medicine. And that's really, I mean, the name of it, the CA part of UCAT is clinical aptitude. So it's a test that's designed to sort of assess how people would function in sort of clinical situations. So it has things like a section on verbal reasoning or decision making and things like that. And again, these are things that not everybody will have studied, but just having a look at some of the questions from those sorts of sections and understanding what it is that the admissions assessment is probing and exploring, that goes a long way to enable someone to really give very convincing answers to questions like that. So I just think practice with the available materials that should sort of even things out a fair amount.
And last question might be quite a specific question. I remember when I was preparing for the TSA, which we don't ask in Cambridge, but I was asking a student who, I think he was a philosophy student, saying that to me it seems like there could be two answers. Is that the case? And he was saying that it might seem like there's two answers, but if you were to do the logic of show the question through its logic, you would see that there can only be one one answer. Do you know what he means by that? What does that mean?
Absolutely, and I think it varies a bit from subject to subject, but often in these multiple choice questions, it's not going to be the case that one of the answers is kind of obvious and the others are just sort of random, because then everyone's getting close to 100% and the admissions assessment kind of ceases to be useful. So what often happens is, there is one correct answer, but there might be other answers that really seem correct if you've maybe just missed out one step, or if you've very slightly misinterpreted something. So in other words, there are other answers that are very commonly occurring ones. They're not correct, but lots of people are likely to say that the answer is 12 when actually the answer is 6, and it's because they've just forgotten to apply one part of the process. So it may well often appear to be the case that there are two seemingly plausible answers, and that's when it's worth just thinking a little bit more precisely about what you're doing and just double checking your workings and making sure that you've done everything that's been required of you. Because if you really have done that, it should be the case 9 times out of 10 that there will be one answer that you're confident sort of clicking that box or whatever and saying, that's the answer to that question.
Nice. I think that's everything. It's classic Classic situation of where you think there's two answers, so the question might be wrong.
Yeah, I'm sure I wouldn't want to swear that that's never happened, but hopefully it's not a common occurrence.
No, yeah, exactly. Well, thanks, Marcus, for useful podcast on admissions assessments. And as I said, we can put the link in the caption so that you can see if your subject requires you to do an admissions assessment. And thanks for the viewers for watching. We're hoping to do more podcasts on the remaining aspects of the admissions process that we haven't done so far. We've made playlists for our podcasts. There's a playlist on interviews advice, another one on general admissions advice outside of interviews, a playlist on all the specific subjects podcasts that we've done, whether that's interviewing academics or students. So do check those out. It's on YouTube, and we'll see you guys next time.